Good evening, my dear students. I welcome you all to today's session for chapter number 4. So I hope many of you have already joined. I could see Karthik, Ayush, Annie, Menon, Sushil. They all have joined. So students, I hope the part which we have covered for chapter number 4 in the last session is clear to all of you. In case any query, any doubt is there, you can always send in your queries. I'll take them either at the end of the session, and I am telling you to send the queries with respect to chapter number 4. I could see there are queries relating to previous chapters also. So I'll resolve your queries, but at the end of the session. Okay? So in the last session, with respect to chapter number 4, students, what we covered is audit risk, risk of material misstatement, which is a function of inherent risk and control risk. We studied about detection risk, and all this risk along with the equation we studied in detail. Okay? And I told you that this entire chapter revolves around essay 315, which we'll be doing today. A small part with respect to audit risk was left, which I'll be covering in the second half of this session. Okay? So let us start with essay 315. So the name of the essay is Identifying. Essay 315, Identifying and Assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So basically, I divide this name of the essay into 4 parts. First is what? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. And how? Through understanding the entity and its environment. And students, in the name of this essay, as such, internal control is not written. But when we go through essay 315 in the explanation, it is written that identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, including the internal control. So environment includes internal control, which has been specified in the text of essay 315. Okay? Now, what is meant by identifying? So I can say the dictionary meaning of term identifying. You can all send in your replies. What do you understand by identifying? So it is what? Discovering. Assessing is what? I have told you in the last session also, estimating. So basically essay 315 requires an auditor to first identify, discover the risk, and then estimate, evaluate it. How? Through understanding the entity and its environment. And how will an auditor understand the entity and its environment? By performing audit procedures. And when the auditor is performing the audit procedures to identify the risk of material misstatement, they are called what? Risk assessment procedures. Risk assessment procedures. Okay? So we will cover up essay 315 in detail today. Okay? And students, your doubt, Karthik, Radhika, I'll take up at the end of the session. So abhi concentrate on this essay. A little bit of this essay you have already covered in chapter number 2. Remember, what was the topic? Quickly tell me. Where have you done essay 315, essay 330, a little bit about these essays? I'm waiting for your reply so as to know whether you have actually taken the benefit of sessions for chapter number 2. So meanwhile, you will send your replies. Let us just try to understand this essay. Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. Now, what is risk of material misstatement? Now you all know that it is a function of inherent risk and control risk. That is risk prior to audit. How? Through understanding the entity and its environment. Okay? Basically, see why auditor is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. See, based on the identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement under SA 315, auditor will be able to respond to such risk where such risk under SA 330. Quickly tell me, what is the name of SA 330? You all have covered it in chapter number 2. Just a line of it was there, but what was it? So the auditors responded to the assessed risk. Yes, Karthik, SA 330. So SA 315 provides a basis to the auditor to respond to the assessed risk under SA 330. The name of SA 330 is what? The auditor's responses to assessed risk. And how will the auditor respond? Again, by performing audit procedures. And when the auditor performs the audit procedure in order to respond to the assessed risk, those are called what? Further audit procedures. You all have done this in your chapter number 2. Okay? So it provides a basis for designing and implementing responses to the assessed risk, where under SA 330, the auditor's response to assessed risk. Okay. So why is the auditor required to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement? Because he has to respond to such risk under SA 330. And identification, assessment of risk of material misstatement, how will auditor do? By performing audit procedures. And when the audit procedures are performed to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement, they become what? Risk assessment procedures. When auditor perform the audit procedures to respond to such risk under SA 330, they become what? Further audit procedures. Right? Okay? Now, auditor has to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. This we have already done at the financial statement level and the assertion level. Now, one query is there that, ma'am, please repeat this topic. See, financial statement level means when an auditor identifies a risk, he evaluates it, he will see whether that risk is pervasive, that is, it is having an impact on the financial statement as a whole. Pervasive is what? Present everywhere. So, whether it is having impact on the financial statement as a whole, or on many assertions. What are assertion? Information that is present in the financial statements. Okay? Thereafter, auditor will see that at the assertion level, what actually is the impact after considering that, okay, this internal control is available. Now, what is the net effect? Risk to hai, par related control bhi hai. So at each and every assertion level, what is the net impact? Accordingly, he will decide his audit procedure at each assertion level. Okay? Clear hai? Whose doubt was it? Radhika, is this clear? Is it clear? Right? Now, just try to imagine, in fact, try to derive the answer to my query from the name of this essay. If I ask you, what will be the steps when the auditor is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement under SA 315, there are 4 steps and 2 you can derive from the name of this essay itself. I need answer 1, whatever is the answer to whatever is the answer. So quickly send in your replies that what can be the steps in order to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement in terms of SA 315. Quickly send in your replies, and the answer is hidden. In fact, it is clearly visible from the name of SA 315. So Radhika is saying it is clear now. So tell me, I'm waiting for your replies, just 30 seconds, then I'll start. So many of you have correctly answered. Rajan S, Dhanalakshmi, Khushi, Meghna, Shri Nagalakshmi, nahin. Shri Nagalakshmi, check your answer. Then Hitesh. So see, first of all, what will auditor do? He will identify the risk of material misstatement. First of all, identify, discovering. Okay? So let us try to understand this with the help of an example. See, while identifying and assessing, one of the audit procedures that an auditor can perform is what? Inquiry. We will be doing this is what? Inquiry. Okay? Otherwise, you know what is inquiry because you have covered this in chapter number 3. So let's say auditor is discussing with the management of the client, management of the company, as to, like, he asked the management, okay, tell me what are your purchases and sales. The management tells the auditor that, see, we have all the purchases from China and we make all the sales, we export to Korea. Now auditor realized, let's say there is a recent change in the government policy with respect to all imports from China. So now auditor discovers a risk that with respect to purchase of entire raw material from a country, whereby there has been a change in government policy. So it can pose a business risk. It can pose a business risk which may lead to what? Risk of material misstatement. So he is discovering how? By performing one of the audit procedures here, which is what? Inquiry. Okay? So identifying and assessing, evaluating the impact. Let's continue with this example. Let's say now the auditor asks the company, the management, that tell me, since there is a change in the government policy with respect to import of the raw material from this country, have you started exploring some other sources for the raw material? The management says, yes, we are already going local, domestically. In India also, we have explored certain suppliers of our raw material. Now see, he's evaluating, he's estimating as to what will be the impact of such risk of material misstatement. And again, what is the audit procedure the auditor is performing is inquiry. So first is what? Identifying. He'll identify in order to understand, plus he'll also identify whether there is any related controls, whether there is any related control with respect to that particular assertion or particular item which is posing a risk. Okay? Then auditor will assess, he will evaluate whether it has that impact is pervasive, it is going to affect the entire financial statements, or is it going to affect number of assertions or only one assertion. This is the step number 2. Okay? Basically at the financial statement level. Okay? Now third, he will check at the assertion level, that with respect to a particular assertion, considering the related control, what is the possibility, like what can go wrong? See, at a particular assertion, he sees that there is a risk But when he considers that there is a related control also, the auditor may make a professional judgment that since controls are very effective, then the chances of anything going wrong at this assertion level is less, right? So he'll consider the risk along with the related control in order to analyze as to what can go wrong at this assertion level. So this is my third step. So first is what? I'll identify. Then I'll assess, evaluate the impact first at the financial statement level and then at the assertion level along with the related control. Okay? And fourth step, auditor will see what are the chances of this misstatement happening. Can this potential, see, abhi to it is a potential risk, risk of material misstatement. Potential is what? Likely. Abhi it hasn't happened na. Auditor is analyzing it na. It may happen. So potential likely misstatement and whether all such misstatements can turn into what? Material misstatements. So this way auditor will be what? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, and environment includes what? Internal control. Very simple, very logical. हाँ, थोड़ा सा आपको समझना पड़ेगा इसको, then there will be no need to cram. ठीक है? So देखो, what will auditor do? He will identify the risk. He will identify the risk. How? Through understanding the entity and its environment. See, the name of this essay is very helpful to you. You will find that in a number of areas you will find whereby the entire name will come, either in the definition, like when we will study the definition of risk assessment procedures, na, the entire name is coming, है ना? और यहाँ पर भी, if I take you through the module, see, identify risk throughout the process, and just a minute, process of obtaining an understanding of the entity and its environment, including relevant control. You will see this line is repeated again and again. See, risk assessment procedures ka hai na? So perform to obtain an understanding of the entity and its environment, including entity's internal control, to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. Can you see? So try to, in fact, you have to learn the name of this essay. Okay? And in fact, all the essays, but I just want to convey this message that learning the name of the essay will make the concept clearer, and this essay particularly, it will help you to learn number of definitions and concepts also. Okay? So second step, Asta, I'll repeat, just a minute. So identify risk throughout the process of obtaining, understanding the entity and its environment, including the relevant control. Pehle identify kiya, fir kya kiya? Assess the identified risk. The risk that you have identified, the auditor will now, what he'll do? He'll assess, he'll evaluate whether they relate more pervasively, having an impact on the financial statements everywhere, on the financial statement as a whole, or potentially is likely to affect what? Many assertions. Okay? So I can say it is basically saying at the financial statement level, auditor will see what is the impact of the identified risk. Okay? Asta, is it clear now? Then relate the identified risk to what can go wrong at assertion level. ठीक है, ऑडिटर ने देख लिया इसका इम्पैक्ट कहाँ है, बट नाउ ही विल सी दैट at each assertion level, considering the relevant controls that company, the management has implemented, now what is the possibility of anything going wrong at the assertion level? ठीक है? And lastly, auditor will consider the likelihood, the chances of misstatement, including possibility of multiple misstatement, whether the potential is what? Likely misstatement is of magnitude that could result in material misstatement. What is meant by magnitude? Basically, I want to say that whether the size or the importance of the misstatement is such that it will become what? Material misstatement. Okay? Magnitude, the size, the importance, or the nature of the statement is such that it will become what? Material in terms of SA 320. Is it clear? So here about the magnitude of potential misstatement, is it clear? So magnitude 4 you can write is having a great size or importance. Basically, if, this materiality we see in terms of the size or the nature of the transaction or the item. No, so here whether that potential misstatement is huge in volume or size, or the importance is such that it will become material in terms of SA 320. So very simple. SA 315, identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. This is the name. Okay? Now, the risk is to be assessed at two levels, financial statement level and assertion level. This is also clear. How? First of all, identify the risk. Then assess and evaluate the identified risk. Consider its impact on financial statement as a whole and whether it is impacting many assertions. Then relate the identified risk to what can go wrong at assertion level. After considering what relevant control, कि risk तो है, but relevant controls भी हैं, तो इसका combined assessment देखना है that what can go wrong. ठीक है? And last, what is the likelihood of the misstatement, that all the misstatement, potential misstatement coming together, whether the magnitude, the size or importance will be such that they'll become what? Material misstatement. So clear? I try to explain it in simplest of simplest languages. So I hope it is clear to all of you. Quickly send in your replies, then we'll start risk assessment procedures, which again you have already covered in detail in chapter number 3. So I'll quickly go revise them with you. Clear? See, Ayush, in my example, if there is a change in the government policy and the government bans the import of raw material from the country, now there is a risk on the going concern. Na? So it automatically impacts the financial statements. Na? Ayush, is it clear? Rahul is saying, ma'am, each and every word is clear. That is good. Okay. Now, what are risk assessment procedures? So, first of all, we'll try to understand and then we will look at the definition. Achha, how to perform, identify and assess the risk of material misstatement? By performing risk assessment procedures. So, be with me, see how to learn the definition also. Now you all know that risk assessment procedures किसलिए करना है? To identify and assess the risk of material misstatement, ठीक है? And material misstatement can be due to fraud or error. इतना भी पता है. Then we also know that it can be, the risk is to be assessed at the financial statement level as well as the assertion level. ठीक है? कैसे करना है? By obtaining an understanding of entity and its environment. इतना पता है, ठीक है? And what will auditor perform in order to identify and assess the risk? Audit procedures. Hana? So all these things combined together will form the definition of risk assessment procedures. I'm quickly going through this topic, Ayush, because this you have already covered in chapter number 3. Okay? But still I'll slow down here. Okay? So risk assessment procedures. So be with me, very simple to learn, and yes, you will have to learn. So the audit procedures performed, okay, why? Now comes all your knowledge, the name of SA 315, then you know that financial statement level pe hota hai, assertion level pe hota hai. Then you know that misstatement can be due to fraud or due to error. Okay? We will combine all this. Kaise? To obtain an understanding of entity and its environment, including entities' internal control. This is coming from SA 315. Okay? Why? To identify and assess risk of material misstatement. This is again from SA 315. And you all know it can be due to fraud or error. Risk can be, misstatement can be due to fraud or error. And now you also know that risk is to be assessed as financial statement level and assertion level. So, very simple to learn, provided you have understood in entirety all the concepts which we have done so far. Okay? So, the audit procedures performed to obtain an understanding of entity and its environment, including entities' internal control, to identify and assess risk of material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error at financial statement and assertion level. Okay? Now, I hope this definition is clear. Quickly send in your reply. Clear hai? Risk assessment procedures. Hiral, with respect to your doubt, na, you are right with respect to detection risk. Kind of, you are right. Huh? Right now, I'll not speak this query because others will also start thinking about it. So sending your reply, is it clear? ठीक है, तो Karthik is saying, "Ma'am, learned also." चलो, that is good. ठीक है, now tell me, when the auditor is performing risk assessment procedures, can auditor base his opinion only on his assessment of risk? So can auditor say that since risk of material misstatement is high, the financial statement do not reflect a true and fair view? Is it possible? What is my question? Let me just repeat it. Auditor has, let's say he has identified, he has assessed that risk of material misstatement is high with respect to this client. Okay? Can the auditor say that financial statement do not reflect true and fair view? This thing implies this. Is it true or false? Only based on his assessment can auditor conclude this. True or false? I'm saying auditor can conclude this. So you all are saying no. Khushi is saying no. Absolutely correct. See, this identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement cannot be the basis of the opinion. Why an auditor identifies and assess? I'm repeating it again so that auditor can respond to such risk. Where? Under SA 330. How? By performing further audit procedures. Now, based on this assessment, auditor can see that if risk of material misstatement is high, I'll increase my work. I'll go for larger samples. I'll go for extensive checking. And based on this work, auditor will give his opinion. Okay? Auditor will give his opinion. Okay? So, what all risk assessment procedures which are specified by SA 315, these are what? Inquiry. I gave you example of inquiry with the management with respect to imports, exports. You can ask whether you have related party transactions. Any question, any inquiry to the management or to any personnel which auditor thinks is having the information. Let us just have a look from the module. So, inquiries of management and others within the entity. Okay? So, inquiries is obtained from management and those responsible for financial reporting. For example, there are a number of examples which are given. Let us just go through one or two. For example, auditor can direct the inquiries toward what? In-house legal counsel. Auditor can ask the legal department of the company that are there any litigations going on? Is there any fraud which has been detected and do you have knowledge of this? Are there any post-sales obligations, arrangements? This way auditor will be able to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement. Okay? Then information systems, inquiries directed to information system personnel. For example, are there any system changes? Auditor can ask whether there has been a change in any accounting software, or any control failures, any control was implemented, was it working throughout the period? है ना. So this way auditor can ask, he can inquire the management, those charged with governance, or any person within the entity which auditor feels is having information with respect to that entity. So this is inquiry which you all have already done in chapter number 3. And you all also know that inquiry alone is not sufficient. This is done now. Inquiry alone is not sufficient. It needs to be associated with some other audit procedure also, like observation and inspection. Okay. Now, what are analytical procedures? So these are basically evaluation of financial information. You will be doing this in detail in essay 520 in chapter number 8. But as of now, let me just give you an example. For example, while auditor is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement, what he did, he analyzed as to what is the trend of GP ratio of the company. And he saw that for the last 3 years, it has been like 8, 9, 10. However, this year, there has been a growth of 15%. So this is something unusual. Na? So it indicates that something unusual has happened. So by performing, this is one of the what analytical procedures. Why? Because analytical procedures are what evaluation of financial information. It includes calculating ratios, considering the trends. Anna, I told you that in chapter number 8, I'll be taking this chapter and we'll be discussing this in detail. Anna, so auditor will see if something unusual has happened. This is something risky, na? Or if I say this is what 5%, this is again something risky. So auditor is performing what analytical procedures. So abhi ke liye try to understand, he is calculating ratios, he is comparing, he is analyzing the trends. This is also one of the what audit procedures. Okay? Then observation and inspection. What is observation? Looking at the process being performed by others. For example, inventory count by the management, right? And what is inspection? Examination of documents or physical examination of the assets. Hana? You have covered this in chapter number 3. So auditor, while he's identifying and assessing risk of material misstatement, he needs to perform certain risk assessment procedures, and those can be inquiry, observation and inspection, and analytical procedures. Examples like observing the entity's operation. This is what with respect to observation. And these are what with respect to inspection. Documents inspect karna, reports prepared by management or entity premises and plant facilities. So what is the difference between observation and inspection? In observation, some person is performing some operations and you are then looking at the process being performed by others. Hana? I gave example of what? The physical inventory count. It is done by the management, na? But auditor will observe it with his eyes. Hana? And inspection is like if I'm going through these papers, if I'm just visiting the factory and I'm just looking at the factory, the physical assets, that is inspection. So these are the risk assessment procedures that the auditor can perform. Quickly send in your replies. Clear? Is it clear? It is just a repetition of what you have done in chapter number 2, a little bit of it in chapter number 2 and a little bit of it in chapter number 3. Okay. Now, students see, understanding of the entity, it is a continuous process. It cannot happen that you have obtained the information. Yes, you need to obtain the information while you are planning. While you are assessing the risk. But this process is continuous. Throughout the audit, this will happen. You will be able to obtain information from this person or the other person throughout the conduct of audit. Okay? Now, what are the benefits of understanding the entity and its environment? Quickly send in your replies. Jisko jo bhi samajh aata hai. And Rahul is saying again, I'm crystal clear. That is good, Rahul. Now answer to my next query, that what according to you are the benefits of understanding an entity and its environment throughout the process of audit? Quickly send in your replies. Absolutely correct, Bharat, that it helps in deciding what audit procedures to be performed. Sri Nagalakshmi saying for planning the audit procedure. Khushi saying knowledge of client business. Khushi, while auditor is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So understanding the entity and its environment means that he's obtaining the knowledge of the client business. है ना? ठीक है. So see, once I have a clear knowledge about what are the risks of material misstatement associated with such financial statement of my client. Hana? Risk of material misstatement means inherent risk of the financial statement or the control risk with respect to the internal control. So I have a knowledge about this. Hana? So first of all, see, it will provide me a scope, a frame within which I need to plan the audit. So many of you are saying, Rahul is saying to set a plan, Hiral is saying proper plan, which is absolutely correct. So I can say it provides me a frame of reference. Frame of reference is what? A scope within which I need to plan, and I need to apply my professional judgment. एक scope पता चल जाएगा ना आपको that this is the area. ठीक है? Then, first of all, the first point comes from the name only. That is, it helps in assessing risk of material misstatement. The purpose of understanding the entity and its environment is what? To assess the risk of material misstatement. Na? So first and foremost, it helps in assessing what? Risk of material misstatement. इसीलिए तो आप understand कर रहे हो ना? Then, also it helps in assessing what? Materiality. After inquiring, after inspecting, observing, performing analytical procedure, the auditor will be able to use this knowledge in assessing what is materiality. Auditor, once he has obtained an understanding of the entity and its environment, he can very well now see what are the appropriate accounting policies. He can also see what are the areas of special audit consideration. For example, when the auditor inquired the management as to what are your major sales and purchases, the management said that we have major purchases and sales from related parties. Now, related party, these are what related party transactions always pose significant risk. So auditor now knows that special audit consideration is to be given to this area. Okay? Or let's say another example, that auditor discussed with the management as to what have been the transaction during the year, and the management said that during the year there has been an acquisition of a new segment. Addition of a new segment. So that becomes area of a special audit consideration. Now, unless and until auditor would have obtained the understanding of the client business, now he would not been aware of the special audit consideration area. Because he obtained the understanding of the entity and its environment, he is in a position to consider as to what are the areas of special audit consideration. Okay? Auditor can develop expectation. Example, while auditor is performing analytical procedure, my example of GP ratio. So auditor can always analyze that since last 3 years, the GP ratio has showing an increasing trend. So this year also I expect 11% GP ratio. So he's developing expectation. And when he'll conduct the audit, he'll compare that expectation with the actuals. So developing expectation, is it clear? Okay? And then after understanding the entity and its environment, once the auditor has understood the entity and its environment, he would be in a position to understand as to whether the audit evidence obtained is sufficient and appropriate or not. ठीक है. So whatever, suppose he have had some oral discussions with the management, he would be in a position to analyze whether this oral discussion is sufficient or he needs to obtain a written representation from the management with respect to the particular assertion. ठीक है. So these are the benefits of understanding. So what is it written? The understanding establishes a frame. Frame is what? A scope of reference within which the auditor plans and exercises his professional judgment. ठीक है. तो कहाँ पे help होता है? When he is assessing the risk of material misstatement, determining materiality as per SC 320, considering appropriateness of selection and application of accounting policies, identifying areas of special audit consideration like related party, going concern assumption, है ना, considering the business purposes of transaction. I gave you example of that China wala na, that all the imports are from, purchases are imported from what? China. Now there has been a ban, let's say, on all the imports from China, then it will definitely have an impact on going concern assumption. Developing expectation. I gave you example of GP ratio. है ना? Evaluating the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence obtained, such as appropriateness of assumptions of management and of management's oral and written representation. तो simple था SC 315. Simple है SC 315. And the last topic which is left in SC 315, then I'll quickly just bring all the topics together. This, तो quickly tell me, ये कहाँ किया है? Detail में किया है. 4-5 pages are there on this topic. Quickly tell me. Hiral, your query is not clear. Please elaborate and tell me the required understanding. You have done a topic, knowledge of client business. Quickly tell me for all those who have covered. ठीक है, chapter number 2 में तो किया है, कहाँ किया है? Knowledge of client business, है ना? So now we are saying again and again, identify and assess the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, including internal control. Now, what all is included? Like what all understanding he needs to obtain. So this topic talks about all that. So let us just try to understand that suppose auditor is inquiring. ठीक है? He'll ask the management, okay, management tell me. So I am on point number 8. I'll quickly go through this topic because you have done this in chapter number 2 in much detail. ठीक है? That management tell me what are the industry, regulatory and external factors and the applicable financial reporting framework. ठीक है? For example, auditor can ask, please tell me whether your product is a seasonal product. What is the supply and demand? है ना? What all laws and regulations are applicable? For example, if the company is having workers, है ना? So Factories Act is applicable, Workmen Compensation Act is applicable. So what all laws in application? What is the applicable FRF? है ना? ठीक है? The nature of the entity. What are the operations, the input, the output? What is the ownership and governance structure? Whether it is centralized, decentralized. What are the types of investments? How the entity is structured and how it is financed. By, see, the structuring, the financing, whether debt is there or whether equity is there. Why? Because if debt is there, then interest payment will have to be checked. Equity is there, then dividend payments will have to check. So provisions relating to dividend will have to check. Okay? Then auditor can inquire the management with respect to selection and application of accounting policies, whether these are consistent, whether these are appropriate or not. So as per FRF and as per the relevant industry, whether the industry, the other companies in the similar industry, whether they are also following the same policies. What are the objectives, the risk and the strategies of the company? Is there any risk? ऐसा तो नहीं है that there is a loss of some, let's say, major supplier, कुछ ban वाला concept तो नहीं है, anything like that. ठीक है? Then the measurement and review of entities' financial performance. So whether the entity is, how the entity is performing financially, है ना? Auditor can see the rating of various rating which is provided by various credit rating agencies like CRISIL, ICRA, है ना? Auditor can consider all those reports. So this is a broad framework as to what will be included in knowledge of client business. Why? Because he's understanding the entity and its environment. ठीक है? ठीक है? So with this we have done essay 315, and students, most of the topics you have done in chapter number 2 and 3. That is why I have quickly gone through this entire topic. But yes, I have elaborated wherever it was required. Still, any queries there, you can forward your queries. I'll just go through the queries that I've received so far. Dhanalakshmi, which topic? You can just refer to the page number. Abhi मेरे को समझ नहीं आया what you want to write. Send in your queries. What is the difference between this point and preceding point? Which point? See, this point was, it basically wants to convey the benefits of understanding the entity and its environment. Okay? What are the benefits? That it will help in what? Assessing risk of material misstatement. What is materiality? In सब चीजों में help करेगा, है ना? And this is what? How? By obtaining knowledge. What all knowledge is mentioned in this point. ठीक है? And how this is to be performed is risk assessment procedure, which are these procedures: inspection, observation, inquiry, analytical procedures. So clear, Dhan Lakshmi? So which topic is left? I told you, Karthik, I've announced in the very beginning of the session that this topic will be covered at the end of the session. Hiral, when we will be covering analytical procedures, essay 520 in chapter number 8, you will understand this in detail. And basically, by applying analytical procedures, like when the auditor is calculating certain ratios, he can develop an expectation that based on the trends, based on the industry, this should be the GP ratio. है ना? उसने एक expectation develop कर लिया. Now he'll compare it with the actual. If there is some difference, he will investigate it. ठीक है? So Hiral, is it clear? So this is the nature of analytical procedure, that it helps in developing expectation. ठीक है, Hiral? So let me just take you through essay 315 quickly, and then we'll be starting with what? Next topic, which is internal control. And again, you will see that in internal control also, essay 315, the internal control is defined in essay 315 only. So the name again will come to rescue. It will help you in learning the definition of internal control. So essay 315, we started by understanding first the name, that it is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. And environment includes what? Related controls. ठीक है? And it is to be done at financial statement level and assertion level. How? First of all, identify करना है risk को. Then assess and evaluate whether it is pervasive, it is having an impact on many assertions. Then with respect to each assertion, what can go wrong considering the related control. Then the likelihood of misstatement, that all the potential misstatement is the magnitude such that it could result in what? Material misstatement. By performing what? Risk assessment procedures. So audit procedures performed. ठीक है? How? To obtain an understanding of entity and its environment. Including what? Internal control. Why? To identify and assess risk of material misstatement, whether due to fraud and error, at what level? Financial statement, assertion level. So that point, that the risk assessment procedures, just a minute. risk assessment procedures by themselves, sorry, however, do not provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence on which to base the opinion. They provide a basis for SA 330. Okay? Then this you can use that information. You can just have a read that information that is that you derive by performing risk assessment procedure that can be used as an audit evidence. ऐसे थोड़ी ना इसको सिर्फ assess करने के लिए use कर रहे हैं. If auditor's professional judgment says that this is one of the audit evidence, he can always use it. ठीक है? Then inquiries, analytical procedures, observations, and inspection. What are these? You all know. You can go through these examples. Then it is a dynamic continuous process, and what are the benefits? It provides you a frame within which auditor plan करेगा, professional judgment लगाएगा, risk of material misstatement, materiality, appropriateness of accounting policies, special audit consideration like related party transactions, developing expectation, evaluating the sufficiency, appropriateness of audit evidence. ठीक है? And how? By obtaining knowledge of the client business. What all is included? The external. See, this is related to external. This is all internal. Then accounting policies. Then ORS, that is your objective, strategies and risks. And then the financial performance. Okay. So many of you are saying, ma'am, no doubt, now you can proceed. Okay. So now tell me, who implements internal control? Now, you must have understood this. Who implements internal control? Send in your replies. Who implements internal control? Is it the management or the auditor? Absolutely correct. Bharat, Sonika, Rajan S, Dhanalakshmi, Radhika, Hiran. Management. Okay? Now I told you that the definition of internal control is given where? In SA 315. Anna? Because when we saw SA 315, it says through understanding the entity and its environment, including the internal control implemented by the management. Okay? So, who management designs, management implements, and management maintains the internal control. Okay? Or those charged with governance or other personnel within the entity. So it is basically the client itself who is implementing, designing, implementing, and maintaining the internal control, not the auditor. That is why we discussed in the last session that control risk, auditor can only assess it, identify and assess it. Auditor cannot control it, right? Because who is responsible for implementing the internal control? The management. Okay? So what is the reason why management implements an internal control? So what is the reason? Who implements it? All this thing will make the definition of internal control. Okay? I've already given you an example in the last session also. Suppose the management implements an internal control that with respect to traveling expenses, any of the voucher exceeding rupees 50,000, this will be signed by 2 signatories. Okay? Why? Because auditor wants to see that no one should get any fake bill passed. It should be signed by 2 signatories. Okay? But we all know that internal control provides you a reasonable assurance only. Reasonable. Why? Because as audit, internal control also has certain limitations. Management ने ही तो बनाया है ना internal control. Management ने ही तो implement किया ना, तो management can always override. Otherwise, there can always be human error. है ना? So these are certain limitations. Okay? So let us have a look at the definition of internal control. So as per SA 315, ठीक है. Internal control is the process which is designed, implemented and maintained. सिर्फ डिजाइन करके छोड़ दें क्या? नहीं, मैनेजमेंट को डिजाइन भी करना पड़ेगा, बनाना पड़ेगा एज पर देयर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन रिक्वायरमेंट्स. देन इम्प्लीमेंटेशन इज ऑल्सो रिक्वायर्ड, एंड देन वेदर इट इज मेंटेन्ड थ्रू आउट द ईयर, है ना. Management realized that in the factory area the CCTV cameras are to be installed. डिसाइड कर लिया कौन सा CCTV कैमरा है, कर लिया, वो भी डिसाइड हो गया. तो उसको इम्प्लीमेंट, इंस्टॉल एक्चुअली भी तो करना पड़ेगा. एंड वेदर इट इज वर्किंग, मेंटेन्ड थ्रू आउट द ईयर और नॉट. सो डिजाइन, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन एंड मेंटेन्ड. By whom? By those charged with governance, management and other personnel. So basically this want to say not by the auditor but by the client, है ना. Why? To provide reasonable assurance. This is not talking about the reasonable assurance that we as auditors get while we are performing the audit of financial statement. This is about reasonable assurance to the management. About what? About achievement of entities objective with regard to 4 things. Okay? So, see why the audit, why the management is implementing the internal control. So let us take the example of CCTV cameras. CCTV cameras are installed so that no one steals the asset. That is for safeguarding the assets. Or let's say there is one of the internal controls that whenever any tax payment is to be made, so the management has implemented a system that whenever any TDS, GST, income tax, advance tax, any payment is to be made, 2 days prior to the due date, a mail will automatically come to the accounts department. This is what internal control. And why? So that compliance with laws and regulations is there. है ना. Safeguarding of assets में I gave you example of what? CCTV cameras. है ना. Reliability of financial reporting. Fake invoices तो pass नहीं हो रहे हैं. Because अगर fake invoices pass हो रहे हैं, then financial reporting is not reliable. And effectiveness and operation, efficiency of operations. So internal control, abhi we are talking about the internal control, a broad internal control, not only related to the finances, है ना. For example, the biometric devices. You must have seen now when you enter the organization, there is a biometric devices for the employees to mark their attendance. They put their thumb, the attendance is marked. When they leave the organization, again they put their thumb on the biometric device, the departure is also marked. So that way the attendance is marked. So abhi we are talking about all the internal controls, not specifically on the financial reporting. Yes, financial reporting is included, but all the internal controls that are implemented by the management. Okay? So ultimately the aim is to achieve the entity's objective. Okay, with regard to what? With regard to 4 things. So if you remember the CCTV wala point, for safeguarding the assets. If you remember the tax wala point, that reminder mails will come. Compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Ki fake invoices are not passed. The reliability of financial reporting. Same way, suppose there is any control, there is internal control with respect to input output process. So effectiveness and efficiency of operation. Okay? So let us try to understand this definition again. So internal control is the process designed, implemented, maintained by those charged with governance, management and other personnel to provide reasonable assurance. Now, why reasonable here? Because we know that there are limitations of internal control also. What are the limitations? We'll be discussing later on. About achievement of entities objective with regard to 4 things. What are these? Reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. है ना. इंटरनल कंट्रोल वैसे थोड़ी ना लगाया मैनेजमेंट ने, दैट मैनेजमेंट का मन किया, नहीं. There is a requirement. Why? Because management wants to achieve the entity's objective with respect to 4 points. That financial reporting should be reliable. There should be effectiveness and efficiency of operations. है ना, unnecessary wastage नहीं होना चाहिए, तो internal control has been put. Then safeguarding of assets and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. ठीक है, so this is the definition given by SA 315. ठीक है, now what is the objective? What is the objective of implementing internal control? Very simple. The management wants that all the transactions that are happening, these are executed with authorization. I gave you example of what? Traveling expenses. 2 authorized signatories will be signing, right? So no one should be able to pass what? Any fake bill. They should be proper authorization. Then another objective can be management wants that transaction are promptly, quickly recorded as and when they happen with the correct amount, with the correct account and correct period. Management wants that assets are safeguarded, and management wants that the assets which are recorded are compared with the actual existing assets at reasonable intervals, and in case of any differences, appropriate action are taken. So I can say that objective of internal control, 2 points are related to transactions and 2 points are related to assets. So what are the objectives? That the transactions are executed as per authorization. इसलिए तो internal control लगाया ना, है ना? No one should just make cash payments like that. The person who is just authorized, he can only make the cash payments. Like suppose any temporary loan to employees is to be given, then authorized channel. It should go through authorized channel. Then the transaction should be promptly recorded with the correct amount, account and the period. The assets should be safeguarded, and whatever assets are recorded and whatever are actually existing, there should be a physical verification at reasonable intervals, and appropriate action should be taken. See, you must be knowing that this physical verification of inventory or physical verification of assets, it is done by management, and this is one of the kind of internal controls only, na? Okay? So these are the objectives. Okay? So let me just have a look at the query, then I'll proceed further. Please zoom the screen. I'll do that. I hope it is clear now, Dhanlakshmi. So he really saying she is able to understand the definition very clearly due to this partition. So that's good, Hiran. Okay? So tell me others also whether the objectives and definition of internal control, whether it is clear or not. Okay? Abhi tak we have done what? Internal control, and what are the objectives. Now, what are the benefits of understanding internal control by the auditor? Now, auditor comes into picture. What are the benefits of understanding the internal control? See, first of all, when we will discuss with the management, okay, management, tell us what are the internal controls that have been implemented. You will be able to know, na, देखो management ने internal control, management must have designed, implemented and maintained the internal control with respect to the assertion which is risky, where there is possibility of misstatement. वहीं पे तो management will also implement an internal control. So when we obtain an understanding of the internal control, it will help the auditor in identifying the potential misstatement कि यहाँ पर लगाए तो यहीं पे तो likely misstatement हो सकती है ना? Same way it helps in identifying factors that affect risk of material misstatement. And last but not the least, it helps in designing the nature, timing, extent of further audit procedure. As simple as that. If you have understood the basic nature of internal control, देखो management क्यों लगाएगा? Because management feels that that is a risky area. So identifying the potential misstatement, identify the factors that affect the risk of material misstatement, and once we have understood internal control, we know we have obtained an understanding that whether they are effective or not, we will be able to understand as to what should be the nature, timing, extent of further audit procedure, what should be the extent of checking, whether we are relying on internal control or not. Accordingly, we will decide our what? Substantive procedures. Okay? So is it clear? Now, Hiral's next question. Hiral is saying, ma'am, are all internal control relevant to the auditor? We will just see. Okay? A very good question, but we will see. Okay? Now, if you just have a look at the purpose of internal control, now you will see that purpose of internal control is same as what we have done from the definition. That is, see, internal control topic is divided into 4 parts. So first we'll be discussing the general nature characteristics of internal control. Then we will try to understand what are the controls relevant to it. Audit. Ab jo I gave you example of biometric devices. So should auditor check that biometric device? Hana? I gave example of CCTV cameras. So should auditor check that? Yeah, auditor should check traveling bill wala internal control. So we'll be discussing that. Then we'll be understanding that after having an understanding of what are the internal control, what are the relevant controls, what is the nature and extent of understanding of relevant controls, kitna usko samajhna hai auditor ko, and then at last we will be discussing components of internal control. ठीक है? So this internal control is divided into 4 parts. ठीक है? So purpose क्या है? If you just look at the definition ना, entity का जो objective था ना, that financial reporting should be reliable, effective and efficiency in operations होना चाहिए, compliance with applicable laws and regulations, safeguarding of asset, वो ही सब है. ठीक है? So you can write same as definition. Now, without looking at the book, quickly tell me what in your understanding are the limitations of internal control. 2 limitations, so I have always told you in the last session also, in this session also. So quickly tell me what you understand, that what can be the limitations. Keep this in mind that management is responsible for implementing internal control. ठीक है? Absolutely correct. Rajan S is saying management override. Sonika is saying collusion of employees, fraud by management. Asta, internal control provide reasonable assurance. ठीक है? Why? Because of the limitations. ठीक है? So limitations are again very simple, but I want all of you to concentrate here. Why? So that you are able to understand and learn also. Karthik is saying human nature, failure in relevant times. So Nagalakshmi, my query is, what are the limitations of internal control? Why internal control gives only reasonable assurance? 100% guarantee to nahi deta na internal control. Why? This is my question. ठीक है. So what are the limitations? So first of all, it says that the first limitation is internal control can provide only reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. Why? Because of the limitations of internal control. So this is basically the opening line of your answer. Okay? Now why? Because human judgment are involved in decision making. See, who is implementing internal control? We have seen from the definition, designed, implemented and maintained by those charged with governance, management or other personnel. So everyone is what? Human. So reality is what? Reality is that wherever human judgment is involved, human judgment can always be faulty. Hana? So there can be breakdown in internal control due to human error. Suppose any internal control is implemented. Let me take my old example only. with respect to tax payments, that whenever any tax payment is to be made, 2 days prior to the due date, a reminder mail will come to the concerned person. Now, while implementing or while calculating this 2 day prior, the person who calculated it, he calculated it wrongly. He implemented an internal control that after 2 days of the due date, the mail has started coming. Now, is that internal control of any use? No. There is human error. Na? Instead of before 2 days, reminder should come prior to the due date. Na? So it is coming after the due date. Why? Because of human error. Okay? So human judgment in decision making, and reality is what? That human judgment can be faulty. Okay? Lack of understanding the purpose. Let us again try to understand this with the help of an example. Suppose a report is generated. There is an internal control that whenever any payment is due from the debtor, an exception report will get generated that it is getting due for more than 180 days. Okay? Now the person who is getting that report, he is not able to understand it. He doesn't know that what is this report, why is this report automatically getting generated. He is not aware. So he is not taking appropriate action. So this is again, though internal control was implemented properly, but the person is lacking the understanding of the purpose why such internal control has been implemented. ठीक है, समझ आता है? Then collusion among employees. And again, example, 50,000 से ऊपर traveling bills जो था ना, that needs to be signed by 2 signatories. ठीक है? However, on one day, one of the signatories is on leave. So management says, okay, pass with signatures of 1 signatory only. So this is what? Collusion among employees. They colluded, they passed their own bills by maybe fake signing or by the signatures of 1 signatory. Okay? So collusion among employees. Judgments by management. See where to implement the control. This is to be decided by whom? Management. They may use their judgments which benefit their interest. So they may say that ठीक है 50,000 से ऊपर it will be signed by whom? The 2 signatories. However, they make a internal control that with respect to all the traveling bills of GM and above, it can be signed by 1 signatory only. So here they don't want to implement what? The internal control. Okay? So judgments by management. And last but not the least, limitation in case of small entities. See, one of the internal control is what? Segregation of duties. That one person is not performing all the tasks. So all the tasks are not under the person who is passing the entry into the system, the person who is, making the payments, or the person who is receiving the payments from the customers. He should not be seen because chances of misappropriation are high. But in case of small entities, such internal control cannot be implemented. Now, why? Because there cannot be segregation of duty. Okay? Further, students, in case of small entity, everything is in the control of one person. So even if there is an internal control, he can always override it, because there is no one to see. He can always break the internal control. He can always unfollow the internal control whenever he likes. Okay? So isliye there is limitation in case of small entities. So let me just take you through these points again. So it provides only reasonable assurance. Provides only reasonable assurance. Why? Because human judgment in decision making is involved. I gave you example of what? When it is mentioned that it can be faulty, human error can be there. See, these are the keywords that I'm writing. If you see now for all those who say, ma'am, how to learn, just see that reality is what? Decision making can be faulty and it can occur due to human error. So these are the keywords that you need to learn. Okay? And rest you can use your language. Then lack of understanding the purpose. I gave you example of what? Exception report. So the person is not able to understand. So he's not able to take what? Appropriate action. These are again the keywords. Collusion among employees. Mili bhagat. Collusion means mili bhagat. when two or more person come together to do something wrong is collusion. ठीक है राहुल? Collusion is not coming to one point for a wrong reason. Collusion among employees, मिली भगत, ठीक है? It is what? मिली भगत. Judgments by management. I gave you example कि traveling bills जो employees की है उसके ऊपर तो internal control लगाना है, but GM and above है, there is no internal control. And last, in case of small entities, segregation of duties is not possible. And since there is one owner, one manager, like he is the person is the owner as well as the manager, he can always what? He can always override the internal controls that have been implemented. Okay? So these are what? These are the limitations of internal control. So the next topic is what? What are the controls relevant to audit? Which was query of one of the student, I think here. So I'll do one thing. Let me just take the queries. Then we will take a break and then we'll start with this topic. Collusion, Hitesh, I hope it is clear now. Radhika, exception report means suppose one of the internal controls that has been implemented by the management is that suppose the payments are to be received from some debtors. Okay? Now, if it is due for more than, let's say, 180 days, so management has made a system in the accounting software that a report will automatically get generated that these are the debtors from whom payment is overdue. It is overdue by, let's say, more than 180 days. Okay? Now, the person who is making the entries with respect to debtors transaction, he receives that list, he receives that exception report. Exception. These are the exceptions now because rest of the debtors have made the payment. But these debtors are exceptionally exceeding the due dates by more than 180 days. Okay? Now, he is not aware as to what is this report. Why this report has been generated. He is not aware about the purpose of this report. So if he is not aware, he will not be able to take appropriate action. Like he will not follow from them because he doesn't know that what is the purpose of that report. Okay? So I hope whose query was this, Radhika? I hope it is clear now. Okay? And whose query is the Dhanlakshmi? With respect to your query, just try to understand the 2 points with the help of the example that I have given to you. Then the difference will be clear. Okay? So with this, I'll take a break of 10 minutes here. After the break, we will start, we will discuss with the topic controls relevant to audit. Okay? Meanwhile, if you have any query, please send in your queries. And also let me know whether you have understood whatever we have done so far in chapter number 4. So a quick break of 10 minutes here. So students, I hope you all are back after the break. Okay. So we were doing topic what controls relevant to the audit. Controls relevant to the audit. Okay. So while we are discussing this topic, now keep in mind the example that I gave you of biometric devices. So the question comes into mind with respect to biometric devices or the CCTV cameras, like to what extent the auditor has to do the checking, whether the auditor needs to check such control or not, and what are the controls which are relevant to audit. Okay? So it says that there is a direct relationship between the entity's objective and the control. Why? Because the management will implement any control for the purpose of achieving the entity's objective. So this is to sure that the control is implemented for achieving the entity's objective. Okay? However, when we as an auditor, we are conducting the audit of financial statements, not all the objectives and not all the controls are relevant to audit. So not all the objective and not all the controls are relevant to audit when we are doing what? Financial statement audit. Okay? So when the auditor is considering as to what controls are relevant, there are certain factors which may affect auditor's professional judgment with respect to the relevance of a control to audit. So what are all those factors which are relevant to the auditor's judgment about whether a control individually or in combination with others is relevant to audit? First of all, materiality. If auditor feels that such control is material, it is with respect to a material assertion, then yes, it is relevant to audit. Okay? We will discuss 2 or 3 examples in detail. Abhi, what we are discussing, that certain factors auditor will keep in mind when he is determining as to whether a particular control is relevant to audit or not. So if it is material, it is relevant. Significance of the related risk. If the risk on which it is implemented, for which it is implemented, it is significant, then yes, it is relevant. The size of the entity. Maybe larger the entity, more the internal control becomes relevant to audit, because auditor will have to rely on all such controls. Okay? Nature of entity's business, including its organization, ownership characteristics, the diversity, complexity of entity operations, applicable legal and regulatory requirements, the circumstances and applicable component of internal control, then the nature, complexity of the system or the use of service organization. For example, let's say salary processing is been outsourced by the client to XYZ service organization. Now, what are the controls relevant with respect to salary processing? So auditor will see whether a particular function is outsourced or whether it is in-house. And auditor will see how a specific control is individually or in combination with other, it is able to prevent or detect and correct material misstatement. Like why a control has been implemented. So when the auditor is determining as to whether a particular control is relevant or not, auditor will consider all these factors. Okay? Is it clear? Is it clear? So what we have seen, that the controls, why are the controls implemented? There is a direct relationship between the controls and the entity's objective. However, all the entity's objective and all the controls are not relevant to audit. So first of all, what are the factors that auditor has to keep in mind when he's deciding as to whether a particular control is relevant or not? He'll see the materiality, he'll see the significance of related risk, he'll see the size of the entity, he'll see what is the entity's business, the structure, the ownership, the diversity and complexity of entity's operation, the legal and regulatory requirements, the applicable circumstances, like what are the circumstances? Maybe in a particular circumstance, a particular internal control becomes relevant to audit. Then the nature, complexity of system, whether any of the functions of the management has been outsourced, right? Outsourced, I give example of what salary processing and why basically a control has been implemented. Okay. Now let us try to understand this with the help of some examples. So I need answers from your side. Let's say auditor wants to audit the sales figure. Okay. So what auditor is doing? He is multiplying the price with the volume of transactions, volume of sales during the year. Now, when he is generating this data, volume of sales, there is some internal control implemented for generation of this data. So this control becomes relevant to audit. Why? Because he is using this figure for as one of his audit procedures. Okay? So what I have given this example, that auditor is analyzing what? Sales figure. So he's analyzing the price multiplied by the volume of sales, and he finds that one of the internal control is implemented here. Okay? Now, since such volume of sales, this is one of the parameters that he needs while he's analyzing the sales figure, such control becomes important for the auditor, relevant to the audit. Okay? Or let us take another example with respect to, let's say, safeguarding of assets. Okay? So suppose there are certain internal control with respect to cash disbursement. ठीक है कि कैश डिस्पर्स होगा तो उससे पहले he will sign, the other person will sign. So safeguarding of one of the asset, which is what? Cash here. So that is relevant to audit now. ठीक है. On the other hand, let us take an example that there is a control in the organization to prevent excessive use of raw material. Excessive use of material. Now, this control might not be relevant with respect to audit of financial statements. We are here to give an opinion on the audit of financial statements. This might be relevant with respect to internal audit or let's say quality audit. But with respect to financial statement audit, this control, which is though important in order to achieve the entity's objective, but this control might not be relevant to the audit. So on cash disbursements, if any control is there, that becomes relevant to audit. But if there is any control to prevent the excessive usage of material during the production activities, operations, so that might not be relevant to the audit. Okay? Another example can be, let's say there is an airline company. Okay? Airline company, one of its objective is that the flights should be as per the schedule. There should be no delays. Okay? So it has put an internal control in order to maintain the flight schedules. Ki flight time hi hone chahiye. This is one of the objective. Now, is this relevant to the audit of financial statements? No. Okay? So though, if you can see, this control is directly related to what? It is directly related to one of the objectives of the airline company. एक objective है ना airline company का, that the flight should be on time. तो उसके लिए internal control is there. So direct relationship है. But this objective and this internal control is not relevant to audit. समझ आया? So a company will design, implement and maintain a number of control in order to achieve its objective. Objective with respect to what? Reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness, efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets. And what was the last point? The compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Okay? Now here we saw 3 examples whereby we saw that in certain situations, though the controls are directly related to the objectives of the organization, but they are not relevant to the audit. Okay? So let us just have a look at this topic from the module. So we saw that there is a direct relationship. Now how to learn direct relationship between entities objective and control? Why? For reasonable assurance about the achievement. Why reasonable assurance? Because we know that internal control has certain limitations. However, the entities objectives and these controls relate to financial reporting operations. However, not all these objectives and controls are relevant to auditors risk assessment. See, the controls, the objectives which are related to what? Financial reporting, those are relevant, but those are relating to operations, they might not be relevant. Okay? So what are the factors? These are the factors which will affect the auditor's judgment as to whether a particular control is relevant to audit or not. And these are the examples. See, standard prices to record sales volume. So if they relate to the data that auditor is going to use, that becomes relevant. That cash disbursement, this cash disbursement may be relevant to the financial statement audit. However, safeguarding controls relating to operations objectives, such as controls to prevent the excessive use of materials in production, generally are not relevant to the financial statement audit. Okay? Then with respect to this airline example, an airline system of automated control to maintain flight schedules, but these schedules ordinarily would not be relevant to the audit. Clear? Okay. Now students, the statute, like for example, the Companies Act 2013, it may require auditor to report on certain internal control. For example, you will be doing in this chapter and chapter number 10 in detail that section 143 subsection 3 clause I. It requires the auditor to report on the internal financial control of a company with respect to certain companies. So there the reporting is required and those become what? Relevant to the audit. Clear? So if a question comes with respect to whether a control is relevant to the audit or not, so firstly what you are going to write, that there is a direct relationship between the controls and the objectives. However, all the objectives and all the controls are not relevant to audit. The financials are, but the operating objectives are not. Then what are the factors? So you will write all the factors, materiality, size, everything you will write. Then you can give one or two examples which we have discussed, like airlines or this cash disbursement. These examples can be given. And at last, what will be mentioned? That with respect to the where there is a requirement on the statute to report with respect to certain internal financial controls, then there the control become relevant for the audit. Clear? Is it clear? Quickly send in your replies. Meanwhile, I'll go through your query. So is it clear? Please send in your replies. Students, see, when I gave you example of biometric devices, so you cannot, generalize that these controls are relevant, these are not. Now let us say that the biometric device whereby the thumbprint of the employees is to be entered, that is having an impact on the salary processing. And salary is one of the what? P&L items. So it all depends upon what? Auditor's professional judgment. So I cannot generalize as such कि ये वाला control relevant होगा या नहीं, because you all are giving me various examples. अच्छा ये वाला particular control होगा या नहीं relevant, So basically, when you are giving me examples कि मैम ये वाला होगा या नहीं, you just consider these factors ना कि वो material है, the risk on which it is implemented, whether that risk is significant. साइज ऑफ एंटिटी को कंसीडर करो ना, है ना. एप्लीकेबल लीगल एंड रेगुलेटरी रिक्वायरमेंट, इफ सम लीगल रिक्वायरमेंट वांट्स द कंपनी टू इम्प्लीमेंट अ कंट्रोल, तो वो रेलेवेंट हो सकता है ना. सो इट ऑल डिपेंड्स अपॉन ऑडिटर्स प्रोफेशनल जजमेंट. ठीक है. सो I cannot, if you are sending me your queries, your MCQs, your drafted MCQs, so I cannot just give a general answer to all these. It would require auditor's professional judgment, and when auditor is applying his professional judgment, he needs to consider all these. ठीक है. Now there must not be any voice problem, I think, Pooja. देखो, all the controls are relevant for management. Why? Because management has implemented now for achievement of the objectives. उसमें से auditor will see what are controls are relevant to audit, and certain parameter has been given कि if this is the parameter, then these controls are relevant to audit. ठीक है. Clear? हाँ, करेक्ट हीरल. दिस पॉइंट इज गिवन इन ऑन पेज नंबर 4.5, है ना, जो मैंने आपको कहा था अभी छोड़ दो. ठीक है. नाउ अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक विच इज व्हाट, बिफोर दैट अ वेरी सिंपल टॉपिक with respect to C. First, we have understood what is the purpose, the nature of internal control. Then we understood what are the controls relevant to audit. ठीक है. Now auditor have understood, अच्छा ये control are relevant to audit. Now with respect to those relevant control, what is the nature and extent of understanding, उसको कितना समझना है ना. I told you कि बायोमेट्रिक डिवाइसेस हैं, दे आर हैविंग एन इम्पैक्ट ऑन द सैलरी. तो क्या ऑडिटर उसको नट बोल्ट उसका सब खोल के चेक करेगा? नहीं. क्या चेक करना है? द नेचर एंड एक्सटेंट, व्हाट ऑल चेकिंग इज टू बी डन. सो दिस विल बी डूइंग नाउ. सो राधिका इज सेइंग मैम अब तक सब कुछ क्लियर है, विच इज वेरी गुड. So see, nature and extent of understanding of relevant control, क्या क्या समझना है. ठीक है. Now in order to see, understand this now, management is responsible for design, implementation and maintenance of internal control. तो ये तीनों चीजें तो समझ लो. What is the design? For example, the management says that with respect to traveling expenses, we have an internal control. So auditor will understand what is the design. अच्छा, the design is that above 50,000 it is to be signed by 2 signatories. ठीक है. Now auditor will see whether it is actually implemented. ऐसा तो नहीं है बस बना दिया, डिजाइन कर दिया. Implemented and maintained throughout the period. ऐसा तो नहीं है साल की स्टार्ट में अप्रैल में फॉलो होता है, मार्च में फॉलो होता है. During the year there is no internal control which is maintained, which is operating effectively. So nature and extent of understanding of relevant control. What is the nature and extent of understanding relevant control? Point number 2 में पता चल गया ना auditor को. Now what kind of understanding he wants? So first of all, he will evaluate the design, whether it is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement. I hope this P or D and C is clear. Last time मैंने आपको अच्छे से समझाया था ये, है ना. तो first of all, you understand the design, whether it is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement. ठीक है. So design of the internal control, then whether it is implemented, that control exists and it is using it. ऐसा तो नहीं है सीसीटीवी कैमरास लगे हुए हैं but they are never on, है ना. So whether they are actually been used. So first of all, auditor will see that. तो क्या क्या देखा? डिजाइन देखा and implementation देखा, and whether it is using it is what maintained also, कि ड्यूरिंग द ईयर यूज हो रहा है ना. नेचर एंड एक्सटेंट, एंड यू ऑल नो कैसे चेक कर सकते हो. यू कैन इंक्वायर, रिस्क असेसमेंट प्रोसीजर्स में आप इंक्वायर कर सकते हो. यू कैन ऑब्जर्व, इंस्पेक्ट, ट्रेसिंग ट्रांजैक्शंस थ्रू इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम रेलेवेंट टू फाइनेंशियल रिपोर्टिंग. जो इंटरनल कंट्रोल से एक्सेप्शन रिपोर्ट जनरेट हो रही है Auditor can himself also trace the transaction, that whether it is coming correctly or not. However, we all know that inquiry alone is not sufficient for such purposes. Auditor will have to perform some other audit procedures along with inquiry. It can be observation, inspection, or anything like that. Okay? So what is the topic? That after understanding what is the relevant control, what understanding regarding the relevant control auditor needs to obtain. So first of all, the design, the implementation. And a design is what? Whether it is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement. And implementation, whether it exists and it is being used. See, अगर design ही अच्छा नहीं है ना, so there is no point in checking implementation. So first of all, the auditor has to consider the design. ठीक है? Then how to perform? By performing various risk assessment procedures. ठीक है? Now try to understand this point, which is the last point. Then we'll start with components of internal control. See, once I obtain an understanding of a manual control, ठीक है? Of a manual control. ठीक है? So, since manual control is what? It is implemented by human. So, obtaining an understanding of manual control is not enough. You will have to see whether it is operating effectively during the year or not. By, for example, with respect to say salaries, there is a register kept at the entry gate, whereby the personals are signing whenever they are entering, whenever they are getting out. So auditor has obtained an understanding, but he will have to check now. Why? Because it might be possible that the employee, they have certain setting with the guard and they are just entering by signing, and even if they are exiting before the time, they are signing it as 5:30 only. Because this is what? A manual control. Vis-a-vis, had it be an IT based control, whereby the doors open only by biometric device, that is where automation is there, the performance of such control tends to be consistent, because there is no human intervention. So the next point says that obtaining only understanding with respect to manual controls is not sufficient. Auditor will have to see whether they are operating effectively or not. Right? However, with respect to the IT controls, auditor, since these are automation, then the auditor can expect consistency. Okay? Is it clear? So let us have a look at this point from the module. Obtaining an understanding of the entity's control is not sufficient to test the operating effectiveness unless there is some automation. That means it is talking about what? Manual control. That with respect to manual control, obtaining an understanding of entities control is not sufficient to test the operating effectiveness unless automation hai. Automation means IT. Okay? However, because inherent consistency of IT processing inbuilt होती है ना consistency. बायोमेट्रिक डिवाइसेस पे किसी ने थंब इंप्रेशन लगाया तभी डोर ओपन होएगा, अंदर से थंब इंप्रेशन आया तभी एग्जिट करने के लिए डोर ओपन होएगा. तो देयर इज कंसिस्टेंसी. सो परफॉर्मिंग ऑडिट प्रोसीजर्स to determine whether an automated control has been implemented may serve as a test of controls operating effectiveness. उससे आपको पता चल जाएगा when you once obtain an understanding. However, with respect to manual control, auditor will have to definitely see whether that is operating effectively throughout the period. Okay? So with this, we have covered the 3 topics. That is what? General nature, whereby we discuss what? The purpose, the limitations. Then what are the controls relevant, whereby we discuss what? The various factors and 3 examples. And then the nature and extent, whereby we discuss that design देखना है, implementation देखना है, automation and manual वाला point हमने देखा है. And then what is the point that we have discussed? Just a minute. How? By performing risk assessment procedures. So this is the way you will summarize. है ना? यहाँ पर टॉपिक को देख के if you are able to list down all the points that we have discussed, half of your learning is done. ठीक है. I hope everything is clear now. Quickly send in your replies. Then a very important topic, very important topic, which is what? Components of internal control. There are 5 components of internal control. Today I think all 5 we will not be able to cover. Let's see how much we are able to cover. Let me just go through your queries. Meanwhile, just send me the replies whether everything is clear or not. Radhika, see, auditor will assess the controls which have been implemented by the management. If there is a control which has not been implemented by the management and should have been implemented as per auditor's professional judgment. So first of all, controls are to be implemented by whom? Management. Auditor will be checking the controls that have been implemented. And if there is no such control, auditor will go for detailed checking substantive procedures. May he'll decide that whether he'll perform more work or less work. ठीक है, Radhika, is it clear? So I hope it is clear. Radhika, is it clear, your query? So Karthik is saying there is no conceptual doubt till now. Chalo, good. Learning जो part है, that you have to do today itself, है ना? फिर अच्छे से learning complete हो जाएगी. Quickly send in your replies whether you have understood. We have done essay 315 today. We started with internal control and 3 parts of internal control, as in the purpose, the controls relevant to audit, and the nature of and extent of understanding of relevant control we have done. Now we'll be starting with components of internal control. I'm waiting for your replies. I haven't received the replies yet. Quickly send in your replies. Hitesh is saying, ma'am, no doubt. Radhika Karthik is saying, yes, ma'am, clear. Others also please reply. So there are 5 components of internal control which we'll be discussing one by one. Okay? So first is what? Control environment. Control environment, very important topic. Quickly tell me, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask you that tell me what is control environment with respect to internal control? Control environment with respect to internal control, one of the components of internal control. So what are the 5 components? The control environment, the entity's risk assessment process, the information system, control activities, monitoring of control. Okay? So we are discussing what? Control environment. So what comes to your mind? Quickly, I need replies. I'm waiting for your answers. Another 15-20 seconds, then I'll start. Control environment. Absolutely correct, Akashni. Radhika, you are also correct. Karthik, you are also correct. So basically, it is the environment of internal control. Okay? So like a flower needs an environment to grow. to blossom, internal control also needs an environment. If a good environment is there, then only internal control will be followed. Let us try to understand this by beginning with an example. For example, again, our same old example, there is a internal control with respect to payment of traveling expenses of the employees. That above 50,000, it will be signed by 2 signatories. Okay? But what happens is every time, whenever the bill of MD, CEO, CFO, or any of the general managers or like GM and above comes, no rule is followed. Now, when the management, when those charged with governance, they are not following any of the internal control with respect to traveling expense, how can they expect the employees to abide by, to follow such internal control? So control environment is an environment whereby the management is creating a culture of honesty, integrity, and such environment is creating control of, it is creating control awareness among the employees. When management or those charged with governance will follow it, then only the employees will follow it. They will become aware. Control consciousness is the word which has been used. Consciousness is what? Awareness. Then only they'll become aware. Otherwise, what will employees say? That we can always leave this because this is not followed when the payments of the higher management seniors is done. So auditor will have to see. So when the auditor is assessed, he is studying the internal control. He is seeing what all controls are relevant. So with respect to the relevant controls, he will have to see the environment. Whether such internal control has been given an environment whereby it is, it has been followed. So whether management is providing a culture of honesty, integrity to the employees, whether there is control consciousness, like the actions of the management, those charged with governance, it should be it should exemplify that. See, employees of the organization should learn that our seniors are following all the internal controls, we should also follow it. Vice versa should not happen, that they are not following, we will also not follow. So a control environment is very, very important for an internal control to be effective. Okay? So there are certain elements of control environment. Abhi, what we are doing, components of internal control. Within that, first of the component is what? Control environment. So what is a control environment? Let me just take you through the module. Just tell me a brief idea as to what is control environment, whether it is clear or not. Absolutely correct, Karthik. He is saying that management plays a very important role in maintaining a good control environment for internal control. Yes. And in fact, it is the management, those charged with governance, who can create this environment. They should exemplify to the employees that, see, we are also following, we are also honest, we also follow integrity. You should also follow it. So there should be a culture of honesty in the organization. It should not happen that for one person there is internal control, for the other there is no internal control. No. Okay? So first and foremost, what is the first component? Control environment. Component of internal control. Quickly tell me whether it is clear. Karthik and Hiral are saying yes, ma'am, it is clear. Others also please reply. What is control environment? Whether it is clear. Okay? So the auditor should obtain an understanding of what control environment. How? By evaluating whether management has created and maintained a culture of honesty, ethical behavior, and the strengths in the control environment. Okay? So the control environment should have a strength so as to support the other components of internal control. What are the other components? These are the other components. So control environment ka strength should be such that it supports the other components. You will be able to understand this line more clearly when we would have done all these components. Okay? But abhi ke liye try to understand that it should be such that it should provide the strength in internal control, provide an appropriate foundation for other components of the internal control. Okay? What is included in control environment? You can get this as MCQ. Hai? So governance and management functions. What is governance? The manner in which a company is controlled or governed. Hai? If for one person the system is something else, for higher management it is something else, rules are not same for the entire company. So auditor will have to see it. Governance and management functions. Attitude, awareness, actions of those charged with governance and management. What is their attitude? Whether they are aware about what is happening in the organization, and if they are aware, what is the action? And it says that it sets the tone of the organization, influences the control consciousness. What is control consciousness? Awareness. If the management, those charged with governance, are so much particular about the control, then only they will be able to convey the awareness to the employees. Okay? So what are the elements of control environment? See, control environment ऐसा तो भी नहीं कि कुछ cover up करके रखना है, कि environment create करना है. Basically, how the management, those charged with governance, how they communicate that these are the values you need to follow. Hana? How the authority and responsibility is being structured. What is the organization structure? What is the involvement of those charged with governance? What is the philosophy of the management? Environment ऐसा थोड़ी ना कुछ सुंदर flowers लगाने या कुछ करना है, नहीं. What is basically the environment? It will be made by the behavior of what? Those charged with governance, management, authority, responsibility कैसा है, organization structure कैसा है. All these will make what? A control environment. So don't get confused between elements of control environment and components of internal control. Components of internal control are 5. One of that is what? Control environment. And then we have what? The elements of control environment. Okay? So what are the elements? The communication, enforcement of integrity and ethical values. Okay? How the integrity and ethical values, how the same is communicated to the employees. Okay? How will it be communicated? ऐसे मैनेजमेंट बोलेगा थोड़ी ना दैट सी मेरा भी ट्रैवलिंग बिल जो होता है दैट इज बीन साइंड बाय 2 सिग्नेटरीज. वो एक्शन से दिखेगा ना. इट विल बी कम्युनिकेटेड थ्रू द एक्शंस ना. सो इट इन्फ्लुएंसेस द इफेक्टिवनेस ऑफ डिजाइन, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एंड मॉनिटरिंग ऑफ कंट्रोल्स. ठीक है. देन कमिटमेंट टू कॉम्पिटेंस. टेल मी इफ एनी इंटरनल कंट्रोल इज इम्प्लीमेंटेड, the person who is looking after that control is not competent enough to understand the purpose of the control, then will that be a good control environment? No. So the management should give, emphasis to competence also. So that is the next point. Enforcement is to apply to make sure that everybody is following it. Shri Nagalakshmi, is it clear that everyone is following it in the organization? Okay? Then commitment to competence. The persons who are working, they should have the requisite skills and knowledge. Then only they will be able to understand the purpose of the control. If you remember, one of the limitations of internal control was what? Lack of understanding of the purpose. And why will it be? Because of lack of competence. Okay? So one of the elements of control environment is what? First is communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical value. How will it be enforced? How will be management sure that everyone is following it? By monitoring the control. What can management do? With respect to traveling, management can ask the accounts person to bring on sample basis or to bring the entire traveling expense file, and they can see that, okay, these are signed by 2 signatories. To monitoring, enforcement, clear Shri Nagalakshmi. Then commitment to competence. ठीक है, they should have the requisite skill and knowledge, तभी तो control environment बनेगा ना. Then participation by those charged with governance. Example of those charged with governance: audit committee, section 177. You will be doing this in detail in your chapter number 10. So whether they are independent from management, what is their experience as stature? Stature is what is their importance, है ना, their reputation, the extent of their involvement, whether they are scrutinizing the activities, the appropriateness of actions, their interactions with internal and external auditors. See, those charged with governance can always discuss with internal auditors and external auditors, then tell us, is there any deficiency in the internal controls, whether these are been followed, whether you have came across any of the incidences where internal controls are not been followed. So what is the involvement of those charged with governance? ठीक है. Then management की क्या philosophy है? Management, what is the management's philosophy and operating style? Why? Because employees are going to copy the management, na? So approach to taking and managing business risk. कोई business risk आया, and whether the management is manipulating the financial statement or trying to handle the business risk, है ना. तो what is the philosophy, operating style? Action towards financial reporting बहुत lightly लेते हैं. For example, या strictly financial reporting में everyone is reviewing it. What is their attitude, है ना? And what is their attitude towards information processing, accounting functions and personnel? Stature is, Hiran, it means importance or reputation. ठीक है. So what was the first point? Communication. Communication of what? The enforcement of integrity, ethical values. Then commitment to competence. Then participation by those charged with governance and management philosophy and operating style. ठीक है. Then organizational structure, है ना. Whether it is centralized, decentralized, that is also going to impact, na. है ना. Then assignment of, see, if it is a small entity, we have seen that internal control means segregation of duty is not possible, na. है ना. Assignment of authority and responsibility. And last but not the least, human resource policies and practices. See, if the employees of the organization are satisfied, है ना, they are being promoted, they are given the right compensation, there is job satisfaction, chances are there that they will not break the internal controls, they will not override the internal controls, है ना. So human resource policies and practice plays a very important role. It is one of the component of control environment. ठीक है. So clear. So one of the most important component of internal control is what? Control environment. And what is that? It basically means what? The governance management functions, the attitude, awareness and actions of those charged with governance and management, the control consciousness of the people, whether management has created and maintained a culture of honesty, ethical behavior, है ना. Then what are the elements of control environment? I'm repeating again, don't get confused between elements of control environment and components of internal control. So communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values, commitment to competence, participation of those charged with governance and management's philosophy and operating style, organizational structure, assignment of authority, responsibility, human resources, policies and practices. This may appear to be maybe boring kind of thing to you, but believe me, very simple, है ना, and important also from the point of view of your examination. What all are the components of control environment? ठीक है. So you need to learn these, very important and very simple. ठीक है. Quickly send in your replies, then only I'll proceed further to the next component of internal control, whether you have understood what a control environment is. And Sri Nagalakshmi and Hiral and Sudhanshu, I hope your query is clear. Radhika, I'll have to but next 15-17 minutes, then I'll end the session. I know today it is getting a little bit heavy, but yes, till 8:30 I'll continue, because see, we'll be discussing the questions, the MCQs, the descriptive type questions and true false, which I'll be uploading on the app, and we'll be discussing them in the next session. So for that I need to cover up at least half of the chapter by today. Okay, so please be patient and please be with me. See, herein, authority and responsibility, it will also make a control environment. Na? If a person is answerable to someone, he will definitely follow the internal control. Na? So authority and responsibility, a person is responsible for something and he is not having any authority to do that work. So will he be able to, work according to the internal controls? No. So there should be a balance between authority and responsibility. It also makes what the control environment. So Hiral, is it clear? Clear? Quickly send in your replies. Then we will start the next component. And now, since you know that we as auditor, we perform risk assessment. Now the P point is entities risk assessment process. So quickly, I need your answers. Tell me what is meant by entities risk assessment process. Don't look at the module. Just give the first thing that comes to your mind. Send in your replies, please. See, the way we as auditors, so we are discussing B point, which is the second component of internal control, which is what? Entities risk assessment process. Okay? So see, the way we as auditors, we are identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. The management must also be having their process of identifying the risk associated with their company, their business. तभी तो internal control लगाया ना. So what is the entities risk assessment process? Is there any entities risk assessment process? If there is no risk assessment process, the entity won't be able to implement the internal control on those specific risks. Na? So auditor must see whether there is an entity's own risk assessment process. We as an auditor, we are identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. But first of all, since management is responsible for preparation of financial statement, they are responsible for implementation of internal control. They also need to have their own process of assessing the risk. So the next component of this is not control environment. You can just rectify it. It is what? Internal control. So the next component of internal control is what? Entities risk assessment process. Okay? So auditor shall obtain an understanding of whether the entity has a process for. So the steps will be same for identifying the business risk relevant to financial reporting objectives, for estimating the significance of the risk, for assessing the likelihood. If you remember, these are the same steps which we did in SA 315. And then deciding upon the actions to address those risks, whether they'll be they'll be implementing certain internal control. So almost same, just for your learning purpose I'm writing. You cannot write this in your exam. So almost same as what? The steps we did in SA 315. ठीक है ना? Identifying, assessing, estimating, assessing, and then what actions they are taking. See, if management is not having any process of assessing the risk, how will they be able to, respond to that risk? How will they be able to implement and design and implement a suitable internal control with respect to that risk? So auditor also has to assess the entity's risk assessment process. ठीक है, whether it is appropriate or not. ऐसे तो नहीं है that management entity's risk assessment process is not appropriate as per the circumstances, the size of the organization, so auditor will consider that as one of the component of what? Internal control. Okay? So we have done two components of internal control. The third one is information system, including related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. Okay? So tell me what all is included in information system. So we are doing the third component. Quickly send in your replies. So students, Karthik, Hiral, Akash, Neil, you are absolutely correct with respect to entities process of risk assessment. Okay? So my next question to you is, tell me the what all are included in information system. See, internal control is there. I told you it needs an environment to grow. Okay? And internal control will not be implemented unless and until management is aware about the risk. So therefore, second point is what? Entities risk assessment process. Okay? Now in this internal control, information system plays a very important role. It is again what? Component of internal control. Okay? So tell me what all is included in information system. Accounting software. ठीक है. Karthik is writing. So I can say, see, information system, hardware, software, and the data. So for all those who are saying accounting records, basically the data, the hardware, the software. So it plays an important role. Na? If I'm saying that a system is there that 2 days prior to the due date of payment of taxes, a reminder mail will come. So the software will send. Na? 2 persons can authorize the payment of a bill through the system. So that is the hardware. Na? Exception report will get generated. That is the data. Na? Hana? So information system is another component of what? Internal control. Student, try to understand why a particular thing is one of the components of internal control. I've told you, control environment hoga tabhi to internal control follow hoga. Entity risk assess karega tabhi to implement karega internal control. Same way, internal control, for implementation of internal control, you need a good information system. And it also include what? People. Information system. If manual information system is there, it is the people who will implement the internal control. So component, a very important component of what? Internal control. So auditor has to obtain an understanding of the internal control and the process. Business process pata hai that this is the input, this is the output. To dekhna padega na where the internal controls are implemented, where the risks are there. Okay? So what all auditor has to consider? So the auditor shall obtain an understanding of information system, including the related processes relevant to financial reporting, including the following. What all are included? The significant classes of transaction. The class of transactions in the entity's operation that are significant to the financial statements. Anna? So what are such classes of transaction which are significant? The procedures by which those transactions are initiated, processed, corrected, basically the accounting system, and reported in the financial statements. So I can say the accounting. How is that accounting taking place? The accounting records. Auditor will consider. See, this is all what? Information system. Na? First of all, what are the significant class of transaction in the information system? How the accounting is being done. Transactions are initiated, recorded, processed, corrected, transferred to general ledger, reported in financial statement. Then the related accounting records, right? Process, the report transactions. Okay? How the information system captures events and conditions that are significant to financial statements. For example, during the year, there has been an acquisition. So this is an event condition which is significant to financial statement. Now, how the system enters, captures, records that transaction. Okay. Then the financial reporting process used by the entity to prepare the entity's financial statement, how the entity's financial statement and controls surrounding the general entries. So basically the accounting information system, whatever are the elements of accounting information system, be it the significant classes of transaction, the accounting, the records, how the events are captured or recorded, how the financial are prepared, and what are the controls regarding general entries. Anyone can pass the general entries. Duplication of general entries तो नहीं है, ठीक है? So auditor will have to consider that. He will have to see whether there is communication between management and those charged with governance, and whether there is external communication with the regulatory authorities. For example, during the year there has been some share issue. IPO has been done. Now, what are the communications with ROC, with SEBI? Okay? Any new loan has been taken. What are the communications with the banks? Have an idea. This is your homework. This is your homework. Just a minute. Basically, it wants to say that with respect to the information system, what are the types of communication that the entity should have? What are the types of communication that the entity should have? Okay? So this is your homework. Okay? So we have covered 3 components of internal control, which is what? Control environment, entities risk assessment process, and information system, including the business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. Financial reporting part we have done. With respect to communication, I've given this to you as a homework that you need to check. You need to go through it, that what all type of communications are required. Hana? So example, I'll just tell you that, see, if the accountant is not aware as to what is his role and responsibility, will the financial reporting be effective? No. Hana? If there are no manuals, there are no, there are no instructions that are given to the finance personnel. So will there be better financial reporting? No. So what all kind of communications are required? Okay? So these 5 points are your homework. Okay? Yes, communication is also to be seen by the auditor. Okay? So see, information system, you have certain information. Whose query is this? Hiral is saying, ma'am, is communication also part of information system? Yes. The purchases department has some information. Unless and until it communicates it to the accounts department, they won't be able to, pass the entries or anything like that. The HR department has an information with respect to salaries of the employees for the year. Unless and until they communicate it to the accounts department, the salaries won't be processed properly. Now. So, Hiral, is it clear? So Ayush, please tell me which point is not clear. Okay. So with this, we have done 3 points. Rest points I'll be covering in the next session. But before concluding the session, let me just recap as to what we have done. And Ayush, please send in your query. What is your query? Okay. So the last topic that we did today is what components of internal control. So there are 5 components. The first one is control environment. Okay? So it basically means whether the management has created a culture of honesty, ethical behavior. Hana? What is the philosophy of management? Participation of those charged with governance, the organization structure, the authority responsibility. Okay? Then communication and enforcement of integrity, ethical values, commitment to competence. and the human resource policies and practices. See, unless and until everything is in place, सबको पता है what is their authority, what is their responsibility, human resource is satisfied, तभी तो internal control will be effective ना. Entities risk assessment, whether the entity is having a process to identify the risk, estimating the risk, assessing the likelihood of their occurrence, and the actions taken thereby. Information system, the significant classes of transaction, the accounting, how is it done, the records, how the significant events are captured, what is the financial reporting process, what are the controls surrounding general entries. What does that mean? Can anybody pass any entry? Then there will be duplication. The communication between what management those charged with governance and with external regulatory authorities. And I have given this you as homework that you need to see as to what all communications are required. In case of any doubt, we will be discussing it in the next session. Okay? Before doing this, what we were doing, we discussed about internal control. So quickly, just we will recap this topic because essay 315 we have done twice. Okay? So internal control is what? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So it defines internal control as what? The process designed, implemented, maintained by those charged with governance, management and other personnel by to provide reasonable assurance with respect to what? Achievement of entity's objective with respect to 4 points, which are what? The purpose of internal control. Reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets, compliance with laws and regulations. ऑब्जेक्टिव्स क्या है? ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं, स्पेसिफिक या जनरल ऑथराइजेशन ऑफ मैनेजमेंट के अकॉर्डिंग हो, प्रॉम्प्टली रिकॉर्ड हो रहे हैं करेक्ट अकाउंट में, करेक्ट पीरियड में एंड करेक्ट अमाउंट से. Assets are safeguarded from unauthorized access, use or disposition. कोई suppose there are computers, CCTV cameras are installed, no one should be able to steal the, let's say, computers. The recorded assets are compared with the existing assets at reasonable intervals, appropriate action is taken. Now you will be able to understand. Auditor shall obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to audit. Although most controls relevant to audit are likely to relate to financial reporting, not all controls that relate to financial reporting are relevant to audit. It is a matter of auditor's professional judgment whether a control individually or in combination is relevant to audit. I hope now it is clear. What are the benefits? Identifying types of potential misstatement, risk of material misstatement, and entry of further audit procedures. Please go through the illustrations. In case of any doubt, we can always discuss. What is the general nature? Purpose, we all know. Limitations, it provide only reasonable. Why? Because human judgment is involved. Lack of understanding the purpose, collusion among employees, judgment by management, and limitations in case of small entities. Our controls, what controls are relevant to audit? Direct relationship होता है किसमें? Entities, objective and control. They provide reasonable assurance for the achievement. However, all objectives and all controls are not relevant for the audit. So auditor को क्या-क्या consider करना है? All these factors. And examples are what? If any data is to be used by the auditor, then control on that data is relevant. Then cash disbursement, if there is any control, that is relevant. However, controls to prevent the excessive usage of material in production, that may not be relevant. Okay? That generally are not relevant. Rest, it all depends upon what? The auditor's professional judgment. Then airline ka example we did, and if any reporting is to be done by the statute, example section 143 subsection 3 clause I, reporting on internal financial control, that becomes relevant. Design समझना है whether it is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and controlling material misstatement. Implementation देखना है whether it has been used. ठीक है. Risk assessment procedures perform करके देख सकते हैं. And manual में only understanding is not sufficient because there is no automation. However, in IT there is inherent consistency. है ना? So there it may serve as a test that controls are operating effectively. Once checked, you can assume that they must be operating effectively, but manual mein to you need to check it. Okay? Components we have done. So with this, we have covered a major, I think half of the chapter is done now. Audit risk is left. So yes, one topic of audit risk is left that I'll just take next 5 minutes and then I'll end the session for today. So one topic was left with respect to audit risk. Okay. So what is an audit risk? Audit risk is a risk that the financial statements it is a risk that the auditor gives an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. That the auditor gives an opinion that financial statements reflect a true and fair view. In fact, they do not reflect. Okay. Now take a situation. I hope you all are with me. Quickly send me a yes or no. Important topic hai for MCQ for true and false. Quickly send in your replies. Just another 2 minutes and then I'll end the session. Okay? So see, if the financial statements are not materially misstated, there is no mistake. There is no material misstatement. However, the auditor gives an opinion that they are materially misstated. Okay? So whether such kind of risk is also audit risk? So the answer is no. Why? Because see, first of all, the management will not let this happen. Na? Management थोड़ी ना ऐसा होने देगा कि financial statements are not materially misstated. However, the auditor is giving an opinion that they do not reflect a true and fair view. And if you remember, risk is something dangerous, unpleasant. And if you remember the definition of audit risk, it says gives an inappropriate audit opinion. So inappropriate to hai situation mein bhi. But when the financial statements are materially misstated, so audit risk is there when they are materially misstated. The other situation that the financial statements are not materially misstated and auditor gives an opinion that yes, they are materially misstated. So this is not covered in audit risk because the risk is ordinarily insignificant and this management won't let happen. Okay? And the second thing says that audit risk, it is a technical term. It refers to the process of auditing. During the process of auditing, if there is a risk that auditor gives an inappropriate opinion, that is covered in audit risk. Any business risk of the audit firm, ठीक है, process of auditing की अब बात नहीं कर रहे हैं. We are saying कि जो audit firm है ना, if that is having a business risk, like let's say some loss from litigation is there, or some adverse publicity of the CA or the CA firm is there. So that is the business risk of the firm. ठीक है, just a minute. So that is what? That is the business risk of the firm. That is not the audit risk. So audit risk is what? The risk that the auditor gives an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. ठीक है? So this covers our first clause. When the financial statements are materially misstated. So when financial statements are not materially misstated, however, auditor says that they are materially misstated. So in the first place, this will not happen. Management won't let that happen. And this risk is ordinarily insignificant. And secondly, the business risk of the audit firm is different from audit risk. Audit risk is related to what? The process of auditing. अगर कंपनी फर्म का बिजनेस रिस्क है that there is some adverse publicity or some loss from litigation, that is not audit risk. Audit risk तो किस लिए होता है? With respect to the audit of a financial statement. It is a technical term related to what? Process of auditing. Very important concept. True, false, MCQ, short note, anything can come. ठीक है? So I hope this is clear. Clear? ठीक है, is there any doubt? Is there any doubt? Is it clear what is not included in audit risk? The vice versa situation is not there. Why? Because audit risk includes a situation when financial statements are materially misstated. See what is written. Audit risk does not include the risk that auditor might express an opinion that financial statements are materially misstated when they are not. Matlab, financial statements are not materially misstated, so that is not covered in the definition of audit risk. Now, the risk is ordinarily insignificant. Further, it is a technical term related to process of audits. It does not refer to the auditor's business risk, such as loss from litigation या adverse publicity or other events arising in connection with the event, the audit of the financial statement. ठीक है? So Karthik is saying, ma'am, everything is clear. And ठीक है, Ayush, you just go through the module, and in fact, everyone, please go through the module in entirety. In case of any doubt, see, internal control, it is a little bit technical topic, and it is very important. You will be studying this topic again in your finals, Hana. So this is the basis of whatever you will be doing in your finals. So if there is any doubt, first of all, to go through the module in entirety, the illustrations, the examples. If any of the illustration examples you want me to discuss in the session, I'll definitely do that. But for that, you need to yourself go through the entire module. Entire means entire, including illustrations and examples, till where we have done the third component of internal control. In the next session, and in fact, before the next session, I would have uploaded the questions to you. So please go through the questions, MCQs, true, false before coming for the session. Okay? So I hope all your doubts are clear. Yes, Hiral, you are absolutely correct that it is in the nature of inherent risk with respect to what? Your audit. Okay, Hiral? Is there any other doubt? Yes, Shri Nagalakshmi, you are correct. The second point relates to the audit firm risk. It is basically the business risk of the audit firm. It is not related to the process of auditing. So Rahul is saying the whole lecture was very clear, able to collect all the thing in the right way. Chalo good. Rest also, please send in your replies whether you are able to understand or not. And Ayush, you please go through the module. Still doubt are there, I'm here to for your help only. So I'll resolve all your doubts. Okay? So next session on Tuesday. Till then, please go through the module in entirety. Okay? Thank you and have a good night. Conclude.